Everyone, I'm Mary Yazdani, founder and CEO of GenesisLink, and I'm glad you are here with us today. While we are waiting for others to join, please feel free to let us know where are you joining from. Halifax. Hi, Joy. Thanks for joining. From one, hi. From Barrie, Vancouver, Regina. So it should be early morning in the Vancouver. Thank you so much for taking the time and joining us today. We have quite uh, attendance from all over. Sometimes there are from specific provinces, but I'm happy that today we have many attendees from different parts of Canada. Toronto, Hamilton, Brampton, Thornhill. Perfect. Oh, New Brunswick. Sorry, I missed that one. Oakville. So for those who are joining Business Immigration Gateway for the first time, welcome. This is a professional series that is designed uh, for us to, and the thesis is simple. We want to go beyond the published guidelines and into how these programs actually work in practice. For those who were with us on March 3rd, thank you for coming back. And I want to be direct about why today's session exists. You asked for it in our March session, Business Immigration Pathway to Canada in 2026. Zeynab and I covered the strategic assessment framework for entrepreneur clients in three active temporary pathways, C11, ICT, and owner operator LMIA, and also SUV backlog strategy. We also cover PNP streams, but at a very high level, and we did this intentionally because we believe PNP deserve a separate session, and that's why we have this session today. What came in after March session confirmed that we made the right choice because we received so many questions and feedback after that March session, bringing your question up and just mentioning what are the topics that you want to be covered in the next session. And that's how we designed today's session. So we are trying to cover as much as possible the question that you sent to us and the concern that you had in a framework that includes four sections, and we will go deep into each of them from assessment and each stage of the PNP streams. So I think now 3 minutes is passed from the start of the sessions, and let's now introduce our guest speaker today. Today, our guest is a known face for you as Zeynab Ziaie Moayyed. She doesn't need full introduction after March session. She is certified specialist in citizenship and immigration law, barrister and solicitor in Ontario, attorney in New York, co-founder of AIMICI, co-chair of the AI committee at the Canadian Bar Association. And like we asked her to come back and she kindly accepted that, especially considering the question that last time arose from the audience. Before we start the discussion and our conversation with Zeynab, first of all, Zeynab, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome back.
Thanks, Mary. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So if you let me, I wanted first to start with reviewing the updates from March session, the updates from IRCC in the PNP streams plus on the federal programs that had happened. That is a confirmation that why we need these sessions and why we need to make sure that everyone has the latest updates because the program and especially PNPs are not static anymore. And they are changing. I think the changes that was announced since the last month, they are more than the last 6 months. And that's why we have this session today. Briefly, I wanted to review those changes, specifically the changes that is impacting business immigration streams. Today, one of the changes that just was announced, it was Bill C-12 that received royal assent on March 26, and that one is making Canada's immigration system and Borders Act stronger, expanding IRCC authority to manage immigration documentation and also formally share applicant data across federal, provincial, and territorial governments. For PNP entrepreneur files, that data sharing provision matters. It means IRCC and provincial assessors are cross-referencing files more systematically than before. The documentation standard now, I think it's something that is backed by the legislatively and all those new legal parts that is in place nowadays. Also on March 30th, we had an update that provinces are granted expanding authority to take the lead on assessing applicants that they are intend to reside in their region and their ability to establish themselves economically, shifting that responsibility away from federal government to provincial government. And I think that's a structural shift in who holds the assessment authority for PNP files. We are going to explore that more with Zeynab and ask about the impact on the business immigration for the PNPs. Also, on March 16, Ontario government, they were granted expanded authority to take the lead on assessing applicants' intent to reside in their region. Oh, sorry, for Ontario, it was they had granting access for the extra access for provincial minister, the authority to create and modify and revoke immigration stream faster. And as a result of that, they are revising all the PNP models in Ontario, including 2 PNP streams for business immigration, specifically and entrepreneurs. One of them is for the businesses who are starting from the scratch, and the other one is designed for the businesses and the clients who want to buy a business in Ontario. That change is going to be announced by the end of May. So for those of you who have clients that they are interested in staying in Canada now, they are here with the temporary status, or they are abroad and they are interested only to apply for Ontario, maybe this is a good time for you to just evaluate the options and also see if they need to prepare something in advance. It's a good time now to use this gap for them. And I think there was another update for PNP nomination allocation across Canada that it was up 31% comparing to the last year. And this is not only that 31% for the entrepreneur streams, but is for general PNP streams. But that will impact also entrepreneur streams in several provinces. We had also several updates for different provinces that the application fees are increasing. We don't want to spend more time on that, but Alberta and also federal government, they announced that Alberta, since yesterday, effective from yesterday, that the application fee for the people who wants to submit a EOI will be increased. And this is something that we are expecting to see for maybe more other provinces, but it's not a huge difference anyway. So that's been said, I just wanted to review only the changes that happened since last month and saying that why we think that this is not, PNPs are not static. We need to get more updates more regularly and educate ourselves. And the next topic that I want to start now with Zeynab is that we know that we have different provinces with different condition, and they own a specific programs, the requirement that is designed for that province. But in general, if you want to give us a brief about what are the common stages of different provinces for the assessment and getting the permanent residence, can you please explain it to our audience before going deeper into each stage?
Absolutely. Thank you for your introduction earlier as well. I do a lot of work around the use of technology and AI, but I've spent most of my career working on business immigration and seeing the evolution of these programs, whether we're talking about the old Quebec program, the old provincial nominee programs. And I think that helps to sort of understand where we are today, what those processes look like, and why they have the specific steps that they do. So going back to your question specifically regarding the current version of the provincial nominee programs that we have that are focused on entrepreneurs across the country, it really goes back to the breakdown and the need that the provinces have to make sure that the applicants are well suited for their province and also that they're going to stay. So you'll see as I break down the steps that these are really the focus points that the provinces have. So each province, depending on their local needs and assessments, have come up with selection criteria and scoring systems. So the first step is sitting down with applicants and ensuring that they meet the requirements of a particular province and understand, like really setting up a strategy for them. And a lot of times, many of the provinces, before you even go into their pool of interested applicants, you want to try to actually do an in-person exploratory trip. But once you have all of that set up, you're going to be entering into their selection pool, submitting an application based on the various factors, age, work experience, language skills, and so on. And there's no exact system in any province. They try to keep as much flexibility as possible, but throughout the year, they will typically do a few draws and invite applicants with the highest scores. So if an applicant receives an invitation, they're moving on to the next step. And at that point, they're going to complete their application, including, what their business plan is, or they're setting up a new business, acquiring something locally, how much investment's going to go in. So putting together really what they're going to do in that province. Most provinces also have a net worth assessment requirement or report requirement. So doing all of that, getting the rest of their documentation, and they will submit that to the province. The province will review it and oftentimes set up an interview with them. If they go through all of these things and they're actually approved at that stage, the province is going to typically do two things. One is ask them to enter into a business performance agreement. And they might be called slightly different names across the board, but that's essentially a commitment on the part of the applicants of what they're going to do and in what time frame.
Mhm.
And once that's lined up and it's done, the province will issue them with some kind of support letter that they can apply for a work permit because these are all active entrepreneur programs. So with that work permit, if it gets approved, which we can talk about more in a few minutes, but they'll get a support letter, they'll apply for work permit. If the work permit's approved, they come to the province and they start working. And it's an active program, so they have to remain in the province. They have to do everything that they've outlined in their BPA. And they typically have, a year or two to do that. And once they do that, they go back to the province with evidence that they've actually made the investment, done the hiring, done the work. And if they're approved, they'll get a nomination. Once they get a nomination, they can apply for the federal portion of their immigration application. And this one's important because a lot of times we'll have applicants who have dependent children that are getting close to a cutoff age, right? And that's the point where the lock-in happens. It's not earlier when they apply for the EOI or get, the work permit and so on. It's when they get the nomination, submit their application. And then from that point, the federal government will assess their permanent residency. And eventually, if they get accepted, they'll get permanent residence, but they do have to remain in the province throughout that time. And I do want to just point out that the intention sort of offloading that the federal government appears to have done with the recent PNP changes, saying that, the provinces are going to determine what the applicant's intention is and the ability for them to become economically established. They have a carve out. The exemption is the business programs. So even though applicants will have gone through this whole process, the federal officers will still have the ability to look at economic establishment and look at intention when they're making that final determination. But that process that I'm outlining is typically at least 3 to 4 years from start to finish.
Thank you so much. That was a great brief and complete and just explanation of the program process. But just now, something came to my mind, backing to the point that you have mentioned about settlement in that province, and also federal government still has a say about this. We have clients that they are asking, like we have a family in Ontario. Is it possible we apply for Alberta? One of the family members go there, or just they establish a business, buy a business, something, and or rent a house and come back to the Ontario. So they have some documents to show that they reside, and they have some evidence, and it's not fake. They actually rent this, they go back and forth, but it's not their permanent home. And mostly it's because they have some kids at a school that they cannot move at the mid of the year. So is that acceptable or something that is a red flag for IRCC and also provincial immigration officers?
So if we go back to the idea that the provinces want people to actually be staying and establishing there and remaining in those provinces,
Mm.
they're really cracking down on those things. If they become aware of it, I think there's also a concern about misrepresentation. Like you're not really in the province, but you're trying to make it look like you're in the province. That's not
Mhm.
good. But there are other things, they're continuously adding to the list of people who can't apply, and each province will have their own instructions. So I highly encourage everybody to go through and read them. So, for example, if you have applied to another province previously, some provinces will not take you. Say this is not an acceptable type of application. On the other hand, if you have full establishment in places, so for example, New Brunswick, if you have finished studies there, if you've worked there, and so on, before you try to enter the pool, those are looked at as positive things. Um, with the level of data sharing, with the ability of the government to sort of track a lot of more
Mhm.
information, personal information about applicants, I think there's a heightened risk. And that's why, these programs can be fantastic, but it's really important from the very first stage when I talk about strategy is sitting down with applicants so that they understand the reality of what a Alberta, BC, New Brunswick application is actually going to look like and what commitment that needs. And, we're sort of jumping ahead a little bit here, but I can talk about the fact that if we don't advise our clients properly, not only are they going to be disappointed and, we're going to be stressed out from that, there are serious potential liability issues that are going to come up, right? Because these
Okay.
programs are not like an express entry application with, some level of application fees. These are potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars that people are investing into a business. And so I think it's much better to have those conversations and address those difficult questions that you're asking me right up front with clients. So they know if they're applying, if they're based in Ontario and they want to apply to Alberta, they have to move their whole family, wait till the end of the academic year, move your whole family to Alberta, and then once you become established, go through the process there.
Thank you so much. That was a great advice. And because sometimes, unfortunately, people are thinking how to just, to go other ways, but I still think about it. So it's really important to understand and explain this to them that if you are aiming to just, have your home and the whole establishment, community, everything on that province is a good option for you to apply. Otherwise, it's so risky. And you have mentioned about the difference with express entry. I would say there is another risk, and it's not only the money that they are spending. These programs usually are taking some time and couple of years to be finalized and receiving their permanent residency. And some of these ones, if they are not planning from the beginning, they cannot go back and fix it later on when they face a problem. So thank you so much. It was a great advice. As I have mentioned, we had an update from Ontario government regarding the entrepreneur streams that it will be launched in May 30th. What these changes signal about where provincial assessment is heading, and critically, what should advisor be telling their clients nowadays with Ontario and the ones that they are interested in Ontario? Is this a gap period? Because before the program announced, is there something that they can do or help them or make them prepare for this new announcement or not?
Okay. I think this is a fantastic question to try and sort of plan ahead. But the reality is that I think two important things we need to keep in mind. We don't know what the specifics are, but we can kind of guess based on the other very popular province, which is British Columbia. Most of their programming is outside of the core um, big cities. So I think we'll probably have something similar to that, where it's going to be smaller communities are going to be easier. Um, the thing is, I don't think anybody should be taking steps in terms of investing, in terms of like specifically looking at particular business opportunities, because again, we don't know what the details are going to be. But what you can do is think about what are the scores that are going to come up in these kinds of applications, right? And one of the most important ones that you can actually impact is language scores. And language scores are important not only because they're a score within the scoring system, like they give you points, and the higher it is, the better it is. They're also really important for the ability of applicants to actually do the job, and that's what's being assessed at the federal level. And it's assessed both at the work permit stage, but it's also assessed at the federal sort of processing stage later on, because while some of the provinces do have things such as, you could technically apply if you have CLB level 4. We're seeing that be a basis for officers later saying we don't actually believe that someone who's only at CLB level 4 will be able to communicate effectively as a business owner or manager in Canada. So I would say take the time to try to make the profiles for clients as strong as possible, and that includes again discussing things with them. But wait to see how the programs will unfold in the next few months. Ontario never has a problem with demand. It's not going to be an issue for them. It's going to be probably very competitive to try and submit successful applications in Ontario.
Yeah, thank you so much. And from a legal and practical standpoint, what is the biggest gap between how advisors interpret PNP guidelines versus how officers actually assess those applications? And does that gap change across provinces like Alberta, BC, Ontario, or others, or not?
I think they're very similar at the province level. Like they have carved out the kinds of, industries, areas, types of work that they're interested in. So they're going to be looking at that, and that's pretty transparent. And I think at the provincial level, things are, um, more clear what the province wants. And so the assessment at that stage, in terms of, let's say, you've disclosed your information and you receive an invitation to apply, that invitation to apply, if the documentation you provide is matching your profile, your education, your assets, your language ability, and so on, I think that's acceptable. There's a different sort of assessment that might take place in terms of the level of detail of the business that you're going to be, running, and whether you're qualified for that. And I think that is where having, our expertise really comes into play. A combination of experience having worked through the programs repeatedly, expertise in terms of business development.
Well, Zainab. Zainab, I'm not sure if you are
To
hearing
make
us.
sure that it is a business that's going to be.
Uh, uh, Zainab, one note here that your voice is breaking, so we didn't get the last sentences that you were saying, unfortunately.
Okay. Um, I'll just take a step back, but
Can I ask you maybe to rejoin, if that's helpful?
do you remember what the last thing is you guys heard?
Um, I was asking about the gap, and you have mentioned that it was on the first or second sentence that you were explaining that we couldn't hear after that. Sorry, I apologize for the internet connection problem. Zainab is going to rejoin the session, but while we are waiting for her to join, I wanted to mention sometimes I saw the challenges that it comes from how you're seeing just the process linear. And there are two very different stages in what advisors often treat as one of them is the selection and the other one is nomination approval. I think if you see them as linear process, that is going to be a problem because the evaluating officer's mindset shifts significantly between these two stages and what matters for them. So getting the after applying for EOI and getting selected doesn't mean that you're all good and you're comfortable. I think Zainab is back. So sorry, Zainab. I use this time to explain one.
No, no, I have no idea why it kicked me out. It just all of a sudden closed down and I'm back. Um, so I'm just trying to remember what was the last thing I was explaining here, which
So it was
was
biggest gap between how advisor interpret PNP guidelines and how officers actually assess the application. You were saying that usually they have clear and well-defined criteria for acceptance, criteria that is defined on the guidelines, and then you were cut off.
okay. So that is helpful because they do have these clear criteria. And if you meet them, you provide documentation, that's great. The place where there's more discretion is around where you have a business model, right? Where they're assessing the kind of business that you're proposing. And that's where our expertise comes in, whether we're able to provide them with the guidance, bring on business advisors and so on that can really look at what the provincial requirements for that particular program are and be able to help them craft a business plan that will be acceptable, right? And not just acceptable for the program, but is actually going to be something that they can do because that's going to go into the BPA and that's going to go down the line. The other thing I want to just point out very quickly is that it's not just that level of scrutiny that's important. And we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but and the assessment and the evaluation that takes place in terms of an acceptable business at the provincial level and receiving the BPA and the work permit support letter is unfortunately not accepted as a full assessment of the business because visa officers for the work permit can go in and look at that more closely. So the provincial stage seems to be much more involved. There's a lot of documents, there's, a lot of things you have to do in a short period of time, but actually it's not the end of the story and it's just the beginning. And I think it's really important to, even at that stage, set yourself up for success at the work permit stage as well.
Okay, that's a great point, and it's taking us to the next section of our discussion. But before going to the next section, I wanted to ask our audience to and run a poll and ask the feedback. I appreciate if you can just engage and share your insights with us. That's helping us for the next session as well to make sure that what do you think, what are the gaps, and we can help you with those one. So the poll is, what is the most significant factor in provincial nomination decisions? What do you think? Is it business plan quality? Is it investment amount, applicant profile, or execution capability and credibility? So what do you think, Zainab?
I think it's a combination of all of those, and if one of them's missing, then it's unfortunately, as somebody commented, Jesse, all of the above. Um, it does come together. You really do have to have those, and it because we don't have any other business pathways. These programs are highly competitive, even for small rural communities. We're seeing very high selection scores. So. Um, I think when you're having those conversations with clients, you really want to emphasize like put all your chips on the table, whatever is the best you can do.
Thank you so much. So let's review the poll result here. Perfect. So it shows that 17% they said business plan quality, 7% investment amount, 21% applicant profile, and 55% execution capability and credibility. You are absolutely right that we missed that option of all the above, because without each of them, the just the whole picture will be broken and there is no success. But thank you so much for sharing your insight, and it was interesting to see that everyone is aware of that execution capability. Good to know that. So let's carry that into the stage where the assessment most often breaks down and where the consequences are most serious. In March Q&A, we had a question and pre-submitted also question that they were asking about realistic success rate for PNP entrepreneur streams. We had several follow-up message that we received afterward that it was asking specifically about the work permit. Clients who had made it through EOI selection and signed a BPA and then hit an unexpected wall of that rejection for the work permit. So can you please tell us more about once a client is selected, signs a BPA, and receive a work permit support letter, what challenges typically arise at that stage that advisor might not anticipated, and that's led to the rejection of the work permit?
So logically, we would think if a province has gone through this really extensive process of vetting and reviewing and interviewing an applicant, then the, IRCC visa officers should accept that support letter and approve the application. And I think in the past, they were far more likely to do so. But what
Mhm.
we're seeing now, and we've been seeing it over the last year, is an increasing refusal of these. Their C60 LMI exemption code. So these work permits are increasingly being refused. And some of the, I can go into some detail about the grounds for refusal, but I think what's important is approaching the work permit as a critical step in the process. It is not just submitting the bare minimums that are on, a work permit checklist. Much as IRCC is doing with all of its various business lines, they're trying to reduce entry to Canada, and they're being much more strict. And they have a lot of tools at their disposal to be able to refuse applications. So you go into it with that mind frame of I'm working against an officer who's likely going to refuse it. What do I need to do? And you really need to think beyond what the minimum requirements are. Some of the I think quite unfair refusals that we're seeing right now are for applicants who have the requirements for language scores that the province wants. So they'll have the CLB level 4, and they'll have high scores in other things, perhaps their age, their work experience and investment and so on. And when they submit their application, the visa officers are saying, I don't believe that someone with CLB level 4 is going to be able to,
Mhm.
carry out this business in Canada. So that's one critical thing. Another one that we're seeing increasingly is that for applicants who don't have prior business ownership experience or have experience in other industries and they're moving to a new industry, a new field, or they're going from being a manager to being a business owner,
Mhm.
that really needs to be documented, how they're going to use their existing tool set, skill set rather, and be able to transform into a manager in that business in Canada. So there's a lot of refusals based on that sort of capacity and capability to do the job in Canada. And as with many of the other business programs that there are, business work permits, you have to be able to demonstrate significant benefit. Again, you would think if someone's applying under an entrepreneur program, they've already met that because the province has assessed it, but it's not sufficient. So these officers are routinely refusing these applications based on we're not convinced that there's going to be significant economic, social, cultural benefit. And so that's something that you have to address. And it's not just a few lines in the submission letter or a few lines in the business plan. It's much more extensive, detailed information that's customized to their business, if possible, backed up with documentary evidence, right? And the final point I'll say is that some of the provinces, so for example, New Brunswick, they have a particular form for the business plan that you fill out for the province. And I've seen applicants just include that when they submit their when they submit their work permit application. Typically, that's not going to be enough because that is a very province centric document and it doesn't address, for example, these concepts like significant benefit and others. So There is a lot of scrutiny at that stage, and it becomes extremely difficult. As with anything else, if you receive one refusal, going back and trying to reverse that is very difficult. We've had a lot of success with judicial review of these refusals because a lot of times they're imposing things that are not in the requirements. Um, Prevention is always best. Taking this advice and making sure those applications are as complete as possible so you don't face a refusal. But if you do, before you think about re-application, because you've already, submitted a complete application, you might want to consider, um, judicial review as an option to break that cycle and get somebody to actually look at that application. Because realistically, if you can't get a work permit, the rest of the process is impossible to pursue, right? So this has become a major hurdle for applicants who are starting on this pathway.
Oh, perfect. And thank you so much. I think it was really insightful and great points that you have mentioned about the reasons for the rejection that you're seeing these days. Also, what are the proactive actions that they can take to avoid and stop that rejection? So it was great. And you already covered the next question that I had. So that takes us to the next poll. If we can just show the poll, please. Which stage are you currently observing the highest level of risk in PNP entrepreneur cases? EOI stage, application stage, work permit stage, post-arrival BPA execution. So we will wait for the seconds here for the responses from here, and then we will go to the next section. I think we are tight in time, so my apologies, but we will show the results. We cannot wait more here. EOI stage 24%, 12% application stage, 48% work permit stage, 16% post-arrival BPA execution. And what do you think about the results, Zeynab? Is it is it
I
what you
agree.
were expecting to see?
I think so. I mean, that's the challenge. The EOI stage is making sure the clients actually have high enough scores to be selected.
Yeah.
But really, if they're selected, the application stage is easier compared to the work permit stage. I think that's become the big hurdle that applicants are now facing. Yes.
And I think it's good to, sorry, to keep that just, distribution in mind when we are moving forward for the execution, nomination, and also pre-PR risk management, which is our next topic. In March, we made a point in the SUV backlog section, and we said the worst thing that a client can do these days while they are waiting is do nothing. And that time we were talking about the SUV, but I think that's the same thing for the PNP as well. So the post-arrival execution phase, once the client is in Canada operating under a business performance agreement, is where the advisor relationship, I think it has to stay live. And let's go into the BPA itself first. Can you explain what is a BPA and how it works for us?
Yeah. So each province has essentially a standard form contract, which is their business performance agreement. And it sets out, you've gone through, you've been selected by them, and you're committing to, the business that you're going to buy, the business you're going to set up, how much investment you're going to make, and also how many people you're going to employ. And those details are going to be solidified and documented in this agreement. And it's important because this agreement is the one that you'll be assessed against, later after you've actually done the work. So they do have to match what your initial expression of interest, information was. So if you had said you're going to invest 500,000, you can't go down. And you also don't want to be increasing it unnecessarily. At this point, there's no reason for you to go back and say that instead of 500, I'm going to be investing more. Because what can happen is that you might end up with a client who says they're going to invest 300,000, let's say. And by the end of it, at the time that they're, submitting their evidence for the nomination stage, they've invested more than that, maybe 50, 100,000 more. That's just a positive. But if you commit to a higher amount, you're going to potentially fall short. And that's creating risk you don't need. But what's important is there's not really negotiation that's going to go into the BPA agreement, but it's an understanding. And again, having those conversations with your clients that these steps have to be followed if you want to actually get the nomination. And one thing that isn't necessarily set out in those BPAs, but that is actually critical, is that applicants have to be present in the province, physically present in the province to be able to do the job themselves, because these are active management programs. It's not going to be sufficient for them to hire somebody to run that business in the province for them. And, some applicants might say, well, who's going to keep track? When you're talking about small communities, in my experience, people keep tabs on each other. There's a lot more information sharing, like organically, of people walking by business, seeing people in the province and so on. And the other part of it is if you do end up leaving the country, so if it's an applicant who potentially has a business in their home country, IRCC is tracking that data, right? They know when you're in Canada, when you're not. And remember, right at the beginning, Mary said we have increased
Fair,
data
fair.
sharing
Yeah.
between the province and the federal government. So all of that is a really important conversation to have when the client is signing this agreement. And then it's going to be the base document that you come back to. In some very limited circumstances, if there are, extenuating circumstances, there might be opportunities for people to go back and discuss changes in their BPA and their business plan with the province, but there's not a lot of leeway for that. And I think applicants will have to show a lot of good faith. So let's say they were going to, do a certain business in a place and then there's a flood or something like something outside of their control, then there might be an opportunity to go back to the province and say, well, we need to change this or change our location, that kind of thing. But otherwise, if they just don't like it or they don't feel like it's going to be successful, that's the kind of, diligence they should have done up front, and they won't be able to change their plan just because they have a change of mind later.
Yeah, no, that was a perfect point. And I wanted to just so now we reviewed what is, and you explained to us what is that BPA, what is the impact on that nomination process, and how important that one is. I want to add one point here that came to my mind, and that one is for the business plan. So this BPA commitment that is outlined in the agreement are coming from the first stage are just submitting the business plan and how you want to do this, what are the next stage, what is your hiring plan, what is your financial plan for the investment, and all of those ones. And nowadays we are seeing that many of this business plan is generated by AI, which is good. There is nothing wrong with it, but the problem is that AI is doing it in a way that convince the officer in the favor of officer, but not reality necessarily. So please be careful if you're using AI. You make sure that you are reading, you are reviewing it with your clients, and make sure that they confirm all those commitment that is outlined on the business plan. Do you agree, Zainab, with this?
I completely agree with you. I mean, AI has some fantastic uses, and I know, I'm all for it, but whether it's within the business plan, whether it's in your application more generally, be very, very mindful of the documents that are being generated because they read beautifully, right? They read amazingly, but they are not necessarily going to be reflective of the facts of the case. And then the other part is that they provide you with explanations that are extremely similar. So this comes up in different kind of contexts, like, when you're doing like a purpose of trip documentation or, things like that. You think that it's giving you an explanation that's unique to you, but it's actually similar to dozens of, or maybe more of explanations that's given to other applicants. And IRCC on the back end has increasingly implemented tools and technology that are tracking things that are similar. So if you're using AI and you're not customizing and you're not really starting with your own thoughts and just asking it to generate things, you might be submitting documents that are going to potentially be flagged for misrepresentation because it's so similar to other submissions that IRCC's received. It sounds ridiculous, but I think we're going to see that more and more. They were already doing that with some template documents that people were submitting, but it's ripe for that kind of risk as well. So use it to polish language, use it in, summarizing things like that, but be very mindful of submitting documents generated by AI because of these kinds of concerns that are going to come up.
Perfect, thank you. And once nomination is granted, advisor sometimes they feel that, oh, okay, so everything is done. But what risk still exists between nomination and permanent residence approval?
Yeah. So it does go back to the BPA a lot, making sure that they actually are going to hit all the requirements that are documenting. Because for the most part, most of BPAs will say what kind of documents they want, but making sure that the client has a system in place to keep that evidence and that documentation. And, we already mentioned it a few minutes ago, but the idea that they have to be there physically and doing the work. They might say, well, um, I can hire somebody or my staff can manage it. I don't need to be a part of it. That is going to turn out to be a problem. If they also have, they only remain and then their family members go to other parts of the country, that can also be used against them because IRCC, as well as the province, can ask for evidence that your family is, dependent family, right? Dependent children and spouses are remaining in the province. So it's really a physical presence requirement and making sure that you're meeting the requirements as per your BPA so that when it comes, your time comes, you can provide the evidence and convince them that you've done that work that you committed to.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And for our section four, we were planning to just talk about how advisors make sure that just, they are protecting their reputation since this is a long process. And now we are 46-minute past of the session, so I cannot go into the details, but I want briefly to ask you, what do you think? What if you want to give one piece of advice to our audience, what would that be?
I think depending on your level of experience working with business applicants, um, first of all, attending sessions like this or other specialized CPD sessions is really important to understand what the reality of these programs are and what the commitment of them are over, the full application life cycle. Because that way you can create, your retainer agreement and manage your client's expectations from day one. I think that's probably one of the most important things that I can say. Generally, our business clients, business applicants, entrepreneur applicants are sophisticated. They can assess risk, but we have to be upfront and be able to advise them what that process really looks like. And they can make that decision. And once they do, if it's an informed decision of what that, the steps of the from the expression of interest all the way to permanent residency look like, and they accept that on a realistic basis, that is going to help you tremendously to be able to manage them over the period of time. Now, things will change, undoubtedly. There might be, Ontario actually canceled their previous program, and there were people in the middle of the process. They received invitations, submitted applications, but hadn't got nominations yet. So, there's always that caveat that the overall programs could change, but at least having a full conversation and developing a strategy for them based on the reality of what things look like now will save you a lot of hassle and problems down the line because, again, these are large sums of money that applicants are investing. I will just touch on something else very quickly, and I think it's really important. I try to raise this point where I can. We are immigration professionals, you're a lawyer, consultant, and so on. We are not business professionals. And so there's a very fine line. Um, for example, if a client's asking me, what business could I invest in Alberta and New Brunswick, whatever, there's some basic information I can give them, but I cannot go out there in the way that a business, broker, for example, can present businesses to them. And as soon as I start to cross that line, I open myself up to liability. Because if there's problems with that business that they acquire, and down the road they want to sue somebody, they can come back and say, you gave me bad advice. So I try to be very clear in my retainer that we're doing legal work, we're providing you with legal advice. And if they want to retain other additional services, they can do so, and it's recommended. I think that's really important because, again, as things change, oftentimes applicants will go to whoever they can reach, right, in terms of trying to get some level of compensation. And we're seeing increasingly people saying, like, we want to sue our representative. They didn't give us complete information, or that they advised us to do something or do not do something. So document everything, have very clear retainers, have a very clear roadmap for them that they sign off on. And when I say document, it really particularly in some cultures, and we kind of have this in the Iranian culture too, like it's a lot of talking. People want to hear something, but you have to put that in writing later because 2, 3, 4 years down the line, who remembers what we discussed on, April 8th of 2026 when we were talking together? It's going to be very difficult to do. But if you have the documentation, it helps your clients know what you talked about before and be able to sort of plan around it. But also, if something goes wrong, you'll have that as documentation that you did provide the advice that was needed at the right time.
No, that's perfect advice, and thank you so much. I think this transparency and honesty with the client from the very first stages is really important to maintain that reputation and continue a healthy relationship with the clients along the way, which is a long way. It's not a quick things that you submit things in just 2 weeks and then you don't see them or they are not interacting with you. It was a great point. Thank you so much, Zainab, for both sessions. I think you provided valuable insight from your expertise and sharing it with our audience. I really appreciate that one. And I think the conversation was really helpful. And thank you so much for our audience who shaped this session by sending us the question and engaging with the sessions and sharing their comments with us. One resource that I want to offer to everyone on this call is that we have prepared a one-page PNP entrepreneur risk checklist that covers the framework, that 4 stages that today we discussed with Zainab, and also the risk that just you will face in each of the stages. We will share with everyone after this session. You don't need to do anything from your side. We will share it with you in the next 24 hours. Also, you will receive the recording of this session. Also, you can find our previous one, which is the foundation of this session on our YouTube channel. And even for anyone that hasn't watched the previous one, you can watch it in sequence. Again, thank you so much. And I know that now we have still 9 minutes for the Q&A. As I have mentioned, any question that we have received, we try to address it. But let me go now quickly into the question that we received within this discussion. So one of them is, at what point of time or a stage applicant needs to make the investment to procure the business? Is it just before the application for work permit or right after business plan approval? How do you safeguard the big ticket investment in the event that work permit gets rejected?
That's kind of related to the previous question that's also there about, closing an escrow and trust accounts. This is unfortunately a risk, I think, for anyone who is potentially thinking of acquiring a business as opposed to starting a business in a province because of the time, right? It's not a situation that you can, identify the business that you want to buy and do the transaction organically. It has to go through this process. And there is a risk if you do try to close it and then the either the selection doesn't get approved or, as the question also asked, the work permit gets rejected. And it does complicate your negotiation because I think, to be on the safe side, applicants through their transaction lawyer who's doing the business purchase will have to put in place a mechanism, right? Essentially say that these are the conditions for acquiring the business, right? Obtaining the selection and obtaining the work permit, and the funds can be held in escrow. Then what would happen is that you would provide all of that evidence along with your application. You would provide it, if you've done it early enough that it's part of your provincial application, but certainly as part of your work permit application that you're providing, that shows that this is going to as soon as the work permit comes in, then the business transaction will be approved. So that is it does complicate negotiations, and it will limit the number of businesses that applicants can buy. But also, a lot of times you're looking at rural areas where there are not going to be a lot of options for the local businesses to sell to. So it kind of makes it a little bit easier to have those kinds of discussions and an understanding, I think, on the part of the sellers that what the process might look like for you to be able to complete that transaction.
Thank you so much. And the next question is, can a business established under C11 work permit later be used to apply on the PNP stream in the same province?
I think that's actually one of the things that can be positive. So let's say that a business is established in I think the example is Alberta, right? It can be used as a positive factor. Now, each province has slightly different requirements in terms of establishment. Some of them might require brand new establishment, compared to others that might say that you might be able to sort of work with something that you've recently established to be able to expand that. But the reason I say it could be positive is that it can show that you already have commitment to the province, right? So it could be an expansion plan for the business, how much more you're going to be investing, how many more people you're going to be hiring, that kind of thing. So I think on a case by case basis, that has to be analyzed depending on the province and the details of the applicant. But in some situations, it might work.
Thank you so much. And if the province supports the application under its entrepreneur stream, would the client then need to apply for a separate work permit under that stream, or could they continue on the existing C11 work permit?
It would depend, I think, on how long their work permit is valid for. Um, if, by some miracle their work permit is valid for like 3 years, then it might be sufficient and you can continue to work. That the point is that you can work as an entrepreneur for that business. And if the C11 closed work permit has enough duration and is, for the business that they're going to be working on, then I think they should be okay. Otherwise, if it's too short or if it was, not for that particular business, then they might have to apply for the C60 work permit.
Perfect. And I think we are just going run out of the time. I try to cover as much as question that I was able during this timeline. I just wanted to mention we will be hosting a focus session around the Alberta entrepreneur streams, graduate entrepreneur stream also with direct insight from incubators that they are just, designated organization to support and assess the clients. If you need priority access, we are sharing the link here. You can just submit the request and register for that event. The details will come soon. Maybe next week, early next week, you will receive the details of the next session. But I think that will be more focused. As Zeynab mentioned, we have different programs in each provinces with different requirements and just so many different things. So it's hard to cover all the provinces in one session. We try to cover as much as possible the general part that was applying for all the provinces, but we will have sessions for each specific province and cover the streams that they have, what are the eligibility criteria, how the assessment will be, how the incubators will see it and assess it as well. So please join us on the next session as well. Thank you so much for everyone that joined us today, and we had incredible audience here. So many people registered, attended, and also engaged during the session. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day. See you soon. Thank you so much, Zainab, again.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.